you just hate not being able to trust your eyes. Mm-hmm. I'm seeing something and I know it's not real. Right. And that's not fair. Like, I want to see something and go, how did they do that? Right. I don't want to see something and think, oh, well, okay, just CG.
Yeah. I mean, I would say, taking it back, my favorite part of this docuseries is the house imploding, where there are shotguns on set ready to blow that thing down the pipe. And it's like, that's gone. There will never be that again.
That's right, Chuck.
Hello there.
Assemble. Just chuck a fire.
99 nerds, we are here for episode 18. It is me, your boy Austin, and Sean Tacular Terry.
Hello.
And we are here to talk about something that hit Disney Plus that caught me and Sean's attention, and we immediately were like, shoot, we got to watch this and we got to talk about it.
Let me tell you something, Austin. I am over 11,500 days old today, and I have never been more excited to talk about something in my life.
This was, not only was Sean a little bit more prepared for this episode than I was, but it's also just like straight up his alley. So I think Sean's going to take the lead for most of this discussion. We are here to talk about the Disney Plus, what would you call it, docuseries?
Yeah, docuseries. It's 6 parts. Each one's about an hour.
Yep, called Light and Magic.
Light and Magic, yeah.
For those who don't know, Light and Magic is the docuseries about industrial light and magic. Sean, what is ILM?
ILM is the visual effects company that George Lucas, in essence, started and founded during the production of Star Wars: A New Hope way back in 1975, 76, whenever they kind of began that. It's interesting, the backstory, because one of the things that we kind of misunderstand about the film industry is it used to be this big thing. You had Paramount and Warner Brothers, right? You had movie studios used to be their own self-contained thing. They had not only their own studios to build the sets in, but they had all their own directors, all their own actors. Mm-hmm. Like, they were kind of these like singular entities. And that meant that their visual effects and their props, that was also all part of the system. Well, what happened is, like, 50s, 60s kind of came and went, and a lot of those studios, they kind of collapsed because, you know, they just kind of got too big and certain things just were getting sold off. So when George Lucas was making Star Wars, the problem was there wasn't any visual effects houses or companies for hire. Right. They just didn't really exist in the way he needed them to be able to make the movie he wanted to make. And so he kind of had to start one on his own.
Right.
And it's so fascinating because you don't think about a visual effects company in 1977. You don't think about it like, oh yeah, these guys are a bunch of professionals. They knew what they were doing and they just kind of like made Star Wars. It's fascinating to think like, no, these were all like, everything they did was kind of made up on the spot. Like, they had to learn how to do all of it.
Yeah.
Like, even stop motion was like, okay, we get stop motion, the idea of like, take a model, animate it, take a picture, animate it some more, take a picture.
Right.
But they were trying to figure out ways to do it beyond the scope of that.
Yeah.
Like, they had to build like motion control cameras.
Yeah.
Which is something like, is so fundamental to me because I work with cameras, I work with video, and it never occurred to me that in the 70s, somebody hadn't really figured that out yet. Mm-hmm. And they were just like doing all this stuff to film models that were like that big.
Yeah.
Because that was the only logical way to make it happen on the screen.
Right. There was another docuseries that was released. What was it called, Sean? The
Empire of Dreams.
Empire of Dreams. I saw that a couple years ago and I was absolutely blown away. That docuseries does a really good job of diving into really George Lucas's story and his story of starting Star Wars and all the obstacles he had to overcome.
Thought he ought to sacrifice himself for the other two characters.
I also felt someone had to go. You know, I felt someone had to die.
And they talk a lot about ILM in that, but this goes even further where...
It was a hero's journey for him.
For sure. I mean, just the mere fact that Star Wars was made is a pure miracle.
Yeah.
And the ripple effects that it created with ILM is like, this docuseries dives into so much that I either forgot or I knew, but I didn't realize how connected all of it was, and how really George and ILM is the very beginning of all of it.
Yeah, we owe so much of what filmmaking is today to George Lucas and the founding members of ILM.
Yeah.
It's funny because people like poo-poo George all the time nowadays because they hate the prequels.
Right.
People hate Jar Jar Binks. They hate him now. People are going to be looking at these films in 50 years and 100 years. They're going to hate him too.
And they feel like, oh, he's not a very good director. He's not very good getting actors to perform. He doesn't know what he's doing.
I imagine George in a crystal castle drinking margaritas, lying on a bed made of people.
A lot of people view George Lucas as the Antichrist.
But the guy is genuinely a pioneer of film.
Yeah.
And it's incredibly underestimated how much stuff is directly from his brain.
Right.
It's not even like he kind of borrowed ideas. He had to just invent something. For example, he invented, alongside with some other people, the non-linear editing system. I'm an editor. I spend a lot of time editing video. And non-linear editing is essentially okay, all of your footage is digitized. You don't have to literally take out the film strips,
right,
and cut them and then tape them together to edit something. It's digital editing. He invented digital editing because he didn't want to sit there cutting film stock anymore.
Yeah. I love how in this docuseries, it's just him over and over again saying there's a better way. There's got to be a better way. This isn't efficient. This. I hate doing this.
There's got to be a better way.
Yeah, and just and there were parts in this docuseries, and we'll kind of run through a little bit of a recap, but where he just he can see that this isn't the best way. The future will be better. And then moments where the computer gets introduced and he's immediately no guys, we need to move towards this. And everybody within his circle and everybody within the industry is holding on to how things are done. And he's no guys, no, this will be how it's done. This will be easier. This will be better.
That's a pioneer, man. That's the definition of a pioneer. Hey guys, I got us. We're going to get to some place. It's greener on the other side. It's going to be better over there. And nobody wants to go.
Yeah.
Everybody's resistant to that change.
Yeah.
And it's guys, this is going to be so much better. It's well, I don't want better. I want things the way they are.
Right.
And then he drags them tooth and nail over to the other side. And they're oh yeah, this is much better.
Right. Yeah. And I watched the, I'll say this. For as much as Disney has botched a lot of stuff, especially with the Lucasfilm stuff.
Sure.
The documentary type content that they have put out, highlighting George, is just, I never would have known these stories. Especially it's the director's roundtable discussion that they did for The Mandalorian.
Yeah.
And Bryce Dallas Howard is there. Bryce Dallas Howard has known George Lucas for a long time.
Maybe her whole life, because her father, the director, Ron Howard, got his start in acting, I think, in American Graffiti.
He did.
And if not that movie, he got into filmmaking because of Star Wars and George Lucas.
Exactly. It's everything is connected with this. And so then she's talking about how George was always, she's I saw him with my dad and we were on set for this movie and that movie. And I can't remember exactly what she says in those roundtable discussions. But her takeaway was George was always 10 years ahead of what the technology would allow him to do. And if he could have been using CGI for A New Hope, he would have.
In fact, he went out of his way to do it.
Yeah.
When he did the special editions.
Yeah, exactly. He went back and redid it all. And it really, they do a good job of highlighting his genius. And if you want to say they tarnished his franchise with the sequel movies.
Who cares, man?
They have honored him personally.
Sure.
Pretty well with what they've been putting out lately.
Yeah, one of the things that I've constantly been frustrated with the Disney takeover of Star Wars, it has so much less to do with the quality of the movies or what I think is the right direction for the stories. The biggest gripe I have that I just can't reconcile is the drastic, devastating lack of transparency about the behind the scenes process.
Yeah.
I've always been frustrated. It's okay, when I hear that an enormous amount of Rogue One was reshot, that Gareth Edwards made the movie, and the original cut they weren't happy with, and so they did extensive reshoots. I'm like, okay, well, that's an interesting story. I want to know what that is. Like, how'd you come to those decisions? Because I want to be a filmmaker. I want to learn like that process.
Yeah.
And like, they don't talk about it. It's not on the Blu-ray. It's not on the behind the scenes. The same thing happened with Solo, where they fired the original directors.
Right.
Reshot 80% of the movie.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's, you guys, you can talk about that.
Yeah.
Like, just put it out there. Let's get the details.
Can we get that original director's like, take on all of this?
Not because it's like, I love the drama, but because I want to know the process that happens that makes that stuff real.
For sure. Yeah, you know what I was thinking throughout this whole docuseries is like, it's crazy how much original footage they have from the early days of ILM.
Because I saw Empire of Dreams multiple times.
Yeah.
And I just assumed that's all the footage they had of those guys back in the 70s.
They got so much. I mean, it was genius. I think they understood in the moment, like, we're doing something nobody's ever done.
Yeah.
There's cameras everywhere. We might as well point one of them at us while we're doing this. I mean, they were thinking ahead. They were thinking the long game on that one.
Everybody had the awesome 70s beards and stuff like that.
Yeah, that was legit. I mean, we can talk about a little bit of the recap. There's so much content. I'll be honest, some of it is kind of, I was thinking during the segment, they're talking about the guy who does the stop motion.
Yeah.
And it's like a huge segment on him.
Phil Tippett, one of them for sure.
Yeah, he's the one who did the Walker sequence for which that was a cool story. So in episode 5, the AT-AT walkers.
I mean, well, it was an extremely elaborate process.
Super elaborate. It was inspired by those drawings. They had
from like a magazine of, I think it was a steel company.
Yeah.
Like put out these weird brochures of like what the future could look like with the steel industry in 50 years.
Yeah, and they had this walking four-legged truck, and they were like, oh my gosh, that's it. That's what we should use.
And then they based of all the things in the world, they based the shape overall on like this like extinct giant mammal.
Yeah.
Like half rhino thing.
Yeah.
It's like really funny to think that there's like a logic to how this stuff played out, because when you're a kid or you're anybody, you just watch Star Wars and you just take it as is. You don't think about like somebody had to kind of invent this,
right?
And then had to like make sense of like how it would move.
Yeah.
And then again, you watch the movie and you just assume it happens the way you see it. You don't think about somebody on their knees for like 70 hours.
Yeah.
Animating every minute detail on this thing over and over and over again.
And they said like they had that set, they had it set up, and they only had one day with it before they had to tear it all down and use that space for other stuff. They said this stop motion sequence needs 2 animators, but one of the guys who was going to do it had the flu, so that guy did all of it.
It's just like
So this docuseries kind of
no choice.
It tells you stories like that. It highlights like key moments that either pushed the boundary and pushed the technology forward, or just like funny stories that are like just cool to hear the history behind it. But amongst all of that, they just like that story with that stop motion guy. It like all of a sudden takes this dark turn where they're talking about how he's basically super depressed all the time.
Yeah.
He's bipolar, and how like this being laser focused on a project for ILM is essentially what saved his life.
Like the concentration required to model and move these little things frame by frame, like this focus he had to have it like it got him through every day, which is like a really interesting way of looking at his work now.
It is, except it was just kind of like this dark moment in the whole thing where it's like,
well, yeah, because it's like it's just these are real people, man. Like really,
I guess so.
And it's interesting because one of the things that I really appreciated so much watching the documentary is that these guys are really like you and me.
Yeah.
I would just assume that they're like miracle workers and magicians, right?
Right.
But they're just dudes who, just like you and me, would show up to work and like not really know what they were supposed to do to make this happen, and they just have to figure it out and like brainstorm until it was possible.
Yeah, I love how they they're talking about A New Hope. They're talking about how George kind of brings these guys together, like, can you try to do this? Can you do that? And he said how it's like almost this underground community of he hired one guy who was like the point man.
Yeah.
And then that guy brought on everybody else. He's like, this guy knew everybody. Oh, this guy knows a guy who can do this.
Yeah,
and this
just a
guy
bunch of
knows
duders being duders.
Yeah. And they all got together and they're in this shack, like this garage with this grungy just furniture and everything's gross, but they're just having a ball. And, they kind of detail how things started, but I loved how George was in Tunisia, was it?
He was in Tunisia at the start of the production for A New Hope, but he spent several months in England.
Right.
Doing the majority of the production, photography was in London.
Yeah, so he was gone.
Maybe not London, but England for sure.
And I mean, it wasn't even like ILM at this point. It was just like, I hired some dudes who are working on this back in the States, back in LA. And he's filming all this stuff. When he finally gets back to LA, all they have for him...
It was like 2 shots, I think.
Yeah.
Like literally just 2. They spent half their budget.
They had the escape pod being released from the rebel ship in the beginning with R2 and C-3PO, and then
like a close up of the turret firing,
and that was it. And how much of the budget did they said they had already spent at that point?
It was like 50% or something like
it's
that.
It's like we've got 80 shots to do, and we just blew through 50% of the budget.
I think it was 400 shots.
Oh my gosh! And they're like, George was, and then George not happy.
And then like a couple days later, George Lucas was in the hospital because he thought he was having a heart attack.
Yeah.
So
just your classic story.
Well, it's great because it kind of reminds you that like the process of doing something great really requires like enduring a lot of stress.
Oh, for sure.
And setback and like the intimidation of hard work. Mm-hmm. Like this stuff was not easy.
Right.
Now it's trivial.
Yeah.
Like there's stuff that can kind of like, I mean, I got plugins in After Effects or whatever that'll do that stuff like without me even thinking about it.
Yeah.
But somebody had to like sit there and literally make tiny meteorites and photograph them one after another 1,000 times until they were tired of designing meteorites. So they just like started putting potatoes on sticks because it's like nobody's gonna notice it's so far off in the distance. Who cares?
Yeah, they said, I don't know if it was in Empire or in Return of the Jedi, but the guy who does those elaborate sequences,
it was what did he put his shoe in?
He had his shoe. He said I had like a wad of bubble gum. And he's like, I could point to them, but they're so far in the background, you would never know. They just look like specks. He's like, but I was having fun with it, and
on.
Those are the cool details that you get.
This multi-million-dollar project, and these guys are just goofing off having fun. Interesting.
Yeah. So then they're progressing, and it's like the smash success of A New Hope.
Yeah.
And one of the things that George says is everybody's freaking out in positive, reviews about how just transformative this is and how just revolutionary it is. And George says, honestly, like looking back at the footage, I think he has a line where he says like, I could see the tape. I could see the rubber bands that we used to hold everything together. And he said,
still not happy.
Yeah. He said, I'm such a perfectionist, and it was only 25% of what was in my head was actually on the screen.
And I'm so glad he said that because I get that intrinsically. Mm-hmm. Like the phenomenon of I feel like I've never made something that was as good in reality as I wished it was in my mind.
Right.
Like I've never surprised myself or impressed myself. I mean, fortunately other people are impressed, but it's like the idea of being a creator and an artist, you have such like big ideas, but you can't like just get them out of you that easy.
Yep.
And that's kind of cool because it kind of reveals the idea of like, you can do it if you just keep going.
Right.
I thought it was really interesting how George would frequently say, just go think about it or whatever.
Right. Well, think about it.
Yeah. Like Dennis Muran would tell him like, hey, that's not going to work. This aerial shot of the snowbanks and Norway or whatever you guys filmed, and you want us to like animate a tauntaun running across the field. Like, I can't really do it. We had to have shot it differently. We could build a giant model of it, but it wouldn't really work that way. And he's just like telling George no. And, George, why don't you just go think about it? And it's like, no, George, it's not going to work. Well, just go think about it. And then he was literally like an hour later or something, like 30 minutes later, he's like, it just hit me like, yeah, that's how we're going to do it. Which is kind of like super inspiring when you think about it. Like the idea of like, hey, nothing's impossible. Just think about it.
Yeah. Just keep thinking. Just
He's a
keep
good
pushing.
leader.
He is, and that he was saying
Which is funny because
on,
he at one point said I'm not a good leader.
Right. Right. Yeah, he said like honestly, like I'm not super good at like managing people, but
because he doesn't like conflict.
Sure.
That's probably his biggest issue.
I'm kind of the same way, and I'm also the same way where like I like doing a lot of DIY projects. Like recently I built a little just like raised garden bed at our house, and I finished it, and my wife's like, "You did it. Oh my gosh, you finished the whole thing. It looks amazing." I'm like, "I hate it."
There you go.
I used miters on the corner. None of the miters line up. The wood is all different. I already made a planter box before that, and the wood I got from one Home Depot was different from the other Home Depot, and I'm just going to look at them all day, every day and see those are two different woods. Those miters don't even line up.
Well, here's the part where you got to put pictures of it to let the internet judge for themselves.
Oh my God. I will link that over my face right now. Yeah. So I could relate to George in that aspect, but yeah, they highlight a couple things and mostly just like the pressure of having to go bigger every time.
Every single movie had to be you had to beat yourself from the last year.
And what was interesting too was the transition from A New Hope to Empire Strikes Back. There's this downtime where George is writing Empire Strikes Back, and this group of guys that he hired are like kind of fiddling around doing nothing.
It's like, I mean, like they had several, maybe a year or whatever of work, nonstop movies. Like we're running behind.
Yeah.
The movie's coming out. We got to hurry, breakneck,
right.
And then like nothing.
Yeah.
And it's funny because it's true. Oscar season is still a few months from now when they're going to get to go on a stage and like hold a statue. But between then and finishing the movie, it's like, hey, Battlestar Galactica called up. We can maybe do some stuff with them, right?
Yeah. So they were doing a little bit of work for Battlestar Galactica because it was kind of like, oh, I hired this group of guys. It wasn't a company at that point. It was just like a segment of guys. And they were just kind of like, we're just like guys for hire, contractor, whatever. And
gang of misfits.
And this job's over, and I guess I'll wait till my phone rings for another job.
What's actually a great benefit for them is a lot of them had like a couple skills, but working in Star Wars, the team was small and the requirements were so extensive. Everybody had to learn how to do pretty much everything.
Right.
Like they had to learn how to be camera people, learn how cameras work. They had to learn to be model makers. Mm-hmm. And there's like a science to making this stuff. It's not just art.
Right.
And they all had to like basically become filmmakers themselves, which is really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the other thing that I really didn't understand, I didn't know this part of the story, is that once Empire Strikes Back was like written and George was starting to get ready to like get ILM actually going, he almost like drafted guys. He like handpicked like these are the guys that were involved in New Hope that I really want to move forward with. Mm-hmm. And what the lead guy in A New Hope was kind of left behind.
Yeah, they were moving the production, like the whole company was going to be in a different part of California.
Yeah, they moved to San Francisco area.
So it wasn't going to be like, okay guys, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing here. Like he had to ask people if they were serious because they would have to move. And it was going to have to be like a whole thing. Like, this is where you're going to be now.
Right.
I think it was John Dykstra, right? He kind of was the lead. He kind of ran and managed A New Hope's production.
Right.
And, it's kind of a weird thing. I'm glad they touched on it in the documentary because it would be easy just to like gloss over that. Like, oh, by the way, this guy wasn't invited to kind of go join the future.
And he was in it a lot. Like there was a lot of scenes where he's explaining New Hope, and like, oh, this is the point guy. And then all of a sudden, like, yeah, but he wasn't a part of Empire. It's like, what?
I guess, and I guess even he admits the problem might have been he was just kind of an immature person, and it was like maybe people just didn't want to work with him.
Yeah,
I don't know. I mean, I think that that's a weird thing to think about, especially because of what ILM would become.
Right.
And that's kind of the awkward part of it.
Sure.
It's like getting kicked out of the Beatles after the first show.
Or like Steve Wozniak, who was number 2 in Apple, and then he kind of got pushed to the side. And Steve Jobs.
Who?
Oh, man.
You mean Steve Jobs?
Yeah.
The guy who started Pixar?
Yeah, so then
they touched on that.
They touched on that. I had no idea that George Lucas essentially invented Pixar.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that.
Well, it's interesting to say because you can never, like, I guess it's not fair to say George Lucas did all this stuff.
Right.
But what he was really good at was getting people who kind of already had a couple ideas and just pushing them.
Right.
Like the Pixar computer, he found people who were doing 3D modeling. Mm-hmm. And he got them into the company, and he just, like you said earlier, he just, like, let them play around.
Yeah.
Until they, like, came up with stuff and, like, this is going to be the future. This is going to be the future. This is going to be the future. And he kept, like, inspiring and motivating these guys to keep trying stuff.
I still don't know how to work a computer. I barely know how to work my cell phone, but I know what I want to have happen.
I guess what's interesting is, like, they invented the Pixar computer. I don't remember why it was called the Pixar computer, but essentially it was like a $20,000 box. $100,000 box that could do 3D modeling. And I think it was like a weird thing where George knew it was going to be awesome, but they just didn't have these guys wanted to do fully CG films.
Right.
But George, nobody was making them at the time, and he didn't want to, like, hold the guys back.
Right.
So he just, like, sold the company and, like, let those guys kind of go off and do their own thing.
Yeah.
And, like, let them keep the name Pixar and everything.
Yeah.
To Steve Jobs, of course.
Crazy. That was one where they're talking about it in the docuseries, and I was kind of distracted while I was watching that segment, and they're, like, cutting to talking about Pixar, and I'm like, oh, I wonder if they're just, like, trying to merge, like, what ILM was doing with what Pixar was doing, because it was all kind of the same thing. And it's like, oh no, this is George's too, and he then sold it to Steve Jobs. I was like, what the heck? He had his hand in everything.
The guys who invented Photoshop.
Yeah.
John Knoll and his older brother.
Yeah, that was another crazy story. That connection I didn't even realize.
Like, oh yeah,
either.
just by the way, John Knoll working at ILM ever since he was a kid. That's all he wanted to do.
Yeah.
And then, like, on a weekend, him and his older brother, like, invent Photoshop.
It's just like crazy.
And then it's like, oh yeah, by the way, George, I think we can use some of this for what we're doing.
He's like, yeah, they brought in this, like, this rough beta version of this new program. It wasn't even called Photoshop at that time. It's like George Lucas and ILM had the first version of Photoshop at their disposal, and just, man, the tree of, like, technological advancement, computer graphics.
Somebody needs to do that, like, literally make a tree with George Lucas as the trunk, and then just show all the things that have developed because of his company.
The movies that were made and the way they were made, the companies that were created. I mean, the people that became who they are today because George started ILM with A New Hope.
I mean, the Ron Howard connection is already, I already mentioned that, but like, something crazy is that James Cameron said he saw Star Wars, he came home and he told his wife, like, I'm going to be a filmmaker. I'm quitting my job. I'm going to be a filmmaker.
Well, we had a conversation before this. I said one of my toxic traits is, like, when I get really deep into something and I'm, like, really invested, I'm, like, researching something, I convince myself mentally that I can do anything. So I'm watching this and I'm like, shoot, like,
I can do this.
I want to be a special effects guy.
I want to be a filmmaker.
I want to build models, even though that's completely irrelevant in today's society.
It is interesting too, because I think everybody who saw Star Wars at the theater and kind of talked about it in the documentary all said, like, oh, it blew my mind.
Yeah.
Which after a while almost sounds like ridiculous, because, like, it didn't really blow your mind. Come on, guys. Like, you're just being exaggerating. You're just, like, being hyperbolic because it's Star Wars and you want to sound like you loved it that much. But I only think that way because movies just don't blow my mind anymore.
Sure.
But at the time, I can understand how somebody could see Star Wars and it would, like, change the game.
Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh. I never knew sitting in a seat in a dark theater could be this.
Right.
Like, I gotta do something. I gotta make movies.
Yeah.
I gotta be the guy. And it's kind of funny too, because it's like, it would have been so tempting for a lot of people to think, oh, well, you know, they already did it first. And, you know, I'm years behind.
Yeah.
It's like, dude, John Knoll was like a teenager when he first went on a tour of ILM.
Yeah.
And then years later, not only is he the guy who creates Photoshop, not only is he the guy who's like pioneering visual effects, years later, he would be the guy who would pitch Rogue One, the film, to Kathleen Kennedy. So
crazy. Yeah. Absolutely crazy how
it's kind of like the idea of, like, hey, when you hang out with innovators like George Lucas and Dennis Muran, you become an innovator. You become inventive and like you dream bigger. You have all these kind of ideas. You believe you can do it.
Yeah.
And like ILM was a place that allowed people to just do it.
It's like it's iron sharpening iron. One thing, like once you understand the tree that George Lucas created, one story that I honestly had not heard up to this point was how when he was a teenager, he was almost killed in a car accident.
Yeah, I never heard that story either.
Yeah, some guy barreling down the street at 90 miles an hour hit him broadside, and he woke up in the hospital, and the nurse basically telling him like, "Don't worry, you have all your arms and legs," and he's like, "What?" And
my gosh.
Everybody there said like, "You should be dead," and it was kind of this like.
Yeah.
Is there like a divine providence over my life where I'm supposed to do something?
Dang.
I mean, the ripple effects in the film industry that he's created are just amazing to see how they break it down and like the history of it year by year. It's not even like just every year something crazy was happening.
Yeah, like you think like, oh, it's a 6-part documentary series. It's probably going to cover the 40 something years. Like, dude, the first 3 episodes barely cover like the first 5 years.
Right.
Like, it's just like so much stuff happening so quick. And what I love about this documentary series so much is it doesn't even focus on George Lucas that much.
No.
Or like, oh, Steven Spielberg, or, you know, it's like random people you've never heard of.
Yeah.
But they were there the whole time. They were the guys who painted the matte painting of Obi-Wan standing over that ledge when he's turning off the tractor beam, and here's this guy who spent hours doing it, and here's this guy who had to like kind of sneakily tell the infamous Ralph McQuarrie, who is also a painter, like, oh god, his clouds he paints suck. I gotta find a way to like sneakily
he's like,
do it on my own because he's not good at it.
He's like, Ralph, we've got so much work, Ralph.
Yeah.
I mean,
let me do that.
You focus on these. I can paint the clouds, Ralph. Let me do this.
And the matte painting stuff is crazy because it's like, it's so good. It works so well. It astonishes me it's still not done more today.
Yeah.
Because I can't believe how like there's so many things I just assumed was a set.
Yeah.
I just assumed they built a set.
Right.
But it's like, because the painting was that well done.
Right.
And to think it's not even just that the painting was that well done, they literally would like paint it on glass and then like line it up and overlay it over the footage.
It's crazy.
And it's like, how did they get the colors and the lighting to match? Like, how did they do that?
I love the guy explaining the Obi-Wan bringing down the tractor beam, because he's like, so like I paint this and it's like, I just paint this infinite abyss.
Yeah.
And then you think about it and it's like, why would they put the switch right over this infinite abyss? It doesn't make any sense, but it just heightens the drama.
Because it looks so cool, you know?
It just admits it. Like, it looks sweet. That's why we did it.
That's why you do it. Or even like Cloud City. Like, okay, you don't even think about the idea that like, okay, here's the shot of the Falcon has landed on the landing platform in Cloud City and the gang is all walking towards Lando Calrissian. You don't even think about, no, somebody painted everything around the scene that the characters are literally walking down. Yeah. And you're like, it's a painting?
It's crazy.
Like, it looks so good. Holy cow.
It really does.
It takes talent, man.
Very, very much so. I mean, the people that were involved in this project were like perfect for the job.
Yeah.
So then, like,
of course, none of them believed it at the time.
No. They talk about how, like, A New Hope, I can't remember how many employees they said they had. It was maybe, I don't know, call it like 40. And then for Empire Strikes Back, they had like 170.
Yeah.
So they went so big with Empire Strikes Back, and then George had not written Return of the Jedi. So there's all this downtime. It was 1980, and they're like, okay, so now what? We've got this giant team of employees and we have to find something for them to do.
Yeah.
So,
and you don't want to just like lay off everybody.
No. So George basically said like, well, I'm going to make it so that like if any of my friends want to use this team, like I'm not there. This team is not allowed to say no to any of my friends. So I would describe it as George had this shiny new toy that could do stuff that no other toy on the market could do. And when he wasn't playing with it, he was going to let his best friends play with it.
That's right.
So the first person who, like, other than Battlestar Galactica using them in between A New Hope and Empire, the first person to really utilize them was Steven Spielberg.
Right.
For Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Raiders of the Lost Ark, yeah, of course.
Which, I forgot, George Lucas wrote Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah, by the way.
He's like, he's like, oh, what are you gonna do next, Steven? He's like, well, I'm really hoping that they let me do like a James Bond film. And George is like,
oh, don't forget all about that. I got something way cooler than James Bond.
So then they do Raiders of the Lost Ark, and then Spielberg is like, absolutely, his mind explodes with what ILM can do for him.
Yeah.
And he basically vows like, I will never do another movie without ILM.
Don't ask what you can do for ILM. Ask what ILM can do for you.
Yeah, so then it fast forwards. What was the movie he did where the house implodes?
Poltergeist?
Was it Poltergeist? Okay.
That was insane.
That was so cool. They break down like how, and like I said, they really like, they give you a really good overview story of ILM, but then they highlight certain things that they did.
Like really specific shots that were very elaborate.
Yeah. So in the script, it said the house implodes.
Not explodes.
Right.
Implodes, which is different.
The guy said I don't know if he sent it to Steven Spielberg, but he's like, you realize this is a $250,000 sentence right here.
Right.
It's like, I can make stuff explode really easily, but you want it to implode.
Yeah, and it's like, oh, well, just film it exploding and then just put it in reverse. It's like, no, that's not the same.
That doesn't work. So they give you really detailed diagrams of how they made this house just get sucked in on itself.
Like it's got all these cables that literally are yanking the house in through a hole.
The house was made of balsa wood and paper, and it was weighted down, and then it was strung with piano strings on the inside, and then it was all funneled through a tube, which was connected to a vacuum and a forklift. The forklift pulled the piano strings, which sucked in the house, and then they had the vacuum to like suck any debris down this hole. And then he had shotguns.
Yeah, just for effect, in case they needed to. They had 2 shotguns shooting at it to break it apart even more.
It was so cool to see that. And it's like, man, who's the guy that was like, this is how we do it? They actually show him.
This is how we do it.
He was talking about, he's like, he spent a long time trying to figure out, like, how can I make this house just get sucked in on itself? Man. And then they show it, and it's like, they show the finished product. They showed you kind of like how they were going to do it with the diagram, and then they showed you the finished product. It's like, man, they were just like pushing the boundary and changing the game
for
every
one
time.
shot.
For one shot.
Yeah.
But then it's like they took what they learned in that Poltergeist, and everything from then on was like, well, if we ever have to do that again, we know exactly what to do.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, nobody else in film knows how to do that.
Exactly.
And that's like the beauty of all of this. Every movie they did, they learned something new, and they took it with them. And there's that. They have like some guy try to do like a what was it, Walter Cronkite? He was like on the set.
Yeah, Walter Cronkite visited George Lucas on the set to do like a little news special on it.
And all the ILM guys were ticked that he was there. It's like, we can't show anybody our secrets.
Well, what's funny is like the idea of like, again, these guys aren't like as professional as you'd think they'd be. And so Walter Cronkite's there and like, okay, well, we're going to pretend to be animating the Tauntaun, and we're going to have 2 guys on it, and they're going to have all these gauges that like kind of pin different parts of it so we know how much it has to move back in place.
Right.
And the guy's like, yeah, none of that stuff would have ever been used. Like, we wouldn't have 2 people working on it ever. We would have never been using the gauges and the rulers and all that stuff. It's like, no, it was way more shooting by the hip.
Yeah. So that was a cool little tidbit. Like, they really were just figuring out as they went. And then George is talking to him like, yeah, I mean, they spent months, researching the movement of these animals to make sure that they can mimic it correctly. It's like, none of that happened.
Well, I mean, Phil Tippett was great because I think it was the Tauntaun, or maybe it was something else, but he was specifically talking about how one of the shots he needed to get was really intimidating because he had to like animate this thing moving realistically.
Yeah.
And so the only way he knew how to do it was like practice. He spent like weeks practicing, doing it over and over and over again on his own, so that when he actually showed up to work to have to do it, it like would look as good as possible.
Yeah.
Like, I've animated something stop motion before. It looks like crap. You might remember it was the shoes. It was like those shoes dancing for that.
I do remember that
series. So it's like, it just looks terrible when you look at it in hindsight, but it's like, so I can kind of appreciate the idea of like, I just assume Phil Tippett knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
And it's kind of really cool to figure out like, no, there was a time he had it pretty much figured out on his own too.
Right. I actually, to go back to when they were doing A New Hope, one of the funniest scenes that I thought was like super interesting to see how they did it was the first tunnel run that the
down the Death Star trench.
Yeah, down the Death Star trench. The first run where I can't remember which pilot it is, but he takes a shot at the exhaust port and he misses.
Yeah.
And how they filmed that was like they put the model outside. It was like 40 feet long or something.
40-foot long model of this trench.
They just put it in the parking lot, and they're like, to get the speed right, we needed to drive a vehicle 20 miles an hour.
Just like set the camera on a truck bed, and they're just
they're just going, and then we detonate the charges, and just boom, there's a big explosion right next to the car.
Exact right moment.
And then they show you them filming it, they show the explosion, they show the car, the cameras, and then they show you the finished product in the movie, and it's like, how did they do this? It's magic.
By faith.
No doubt.
So what's actually kind of interesting about the documentary series that we started getting into, we haven't finished it yet.
Yeah.
But now that you're getting towards like the later half of it, is the transition to like what they call the dark side.
Yeah.
Which is okay. Now they've done all these things, and little bit by little bit, they're experimenting with computers to do some of the visual effects.
Right.
And how that slowly starts taking over.
Yeah.
And like the model makers feel like they're not as important anymore.
Right.
And, they start kind of pulling talent from some of the other departments to get them learning CG and working on computers. Like Dennis Muran, talking about how he took a vacation and he just read like an 1,800-page book on computer graphics so that he could like figure it out.
Yeah, he was kind of the mediator between the two groups.
Which is interesting because he, at this point in his life, he's probably in his 40s, maybe 50s. I mean, this is at a stage where people are thinking about like retiring, or they're not interested in changing careers.
Right.
But here's a guy who was like, no, I got to figure this out. So we're gonna just figure it out.
Yeah, he was the one where they said like they had two campuses. They had the computer campus, and they had like all the other former current employees, and all the current employees, like you said, the model makers and everything. They were not. Like they weren't friendly with the computer guys.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a bunch of young blood kind of all heading over into the computer area.
The dark side.
Yeah, here's this lady who designed, who did a commercial where she animated a baby's face so it looked like it was talking. And so now she's been recruited by Lucasfilm to be one of the people who works in their CG department.
Yep.
And then here's this kid from college who learned how to do CG stuff in his spare time, and then he ends up there. And so you not only do you have like, because you got to think about like a company like that, you have the original people, but then you also over time start adding new people, new members of the team. But there's like slowly but surely a transition where the newest hires are no longer kind of working alongside the old guard anymore. They're all ending up somewhere else to work on the future.
Right.
And that must have started to feel kind of weird.
Sure.
Because it's like, not only am I getting older in my craft, but I'm getting older and I'm like alone.
Yeah.
Like I'm not seeing new people come in and work with me.
Yeah.
Like I'm just stuck here until slowly the digital realm starts taking over everything.
Yeah. And just like one of the stories that they touched on that I thought was pretty cool, and I had not heard this story, was after Return of the Jedi, who was the guy that basically got burnt out and he wanted to walk away? He wanted to retire.
I don't remember his name.
But yeah, it was almost to the point
Brian Johnston?
Yes, because he was saying like ILM no longer was fun.
Yeah.
It was just like
it was just too much work.
Non-stop grinding where they were trying to meet deadlines and then boom, immediately onto the next movie. Boom, immediately onto the next movie. And then specifically Return of the Jedi was so intense because they wanted to top Empire with the effects that he just got burnt out. And he went to George and basically said, like, I'm done. I want to take some of this money that I've earned and I want to travel with my wife. And George said, well, wouldn't you rather go to film school?
I'll pay for it. I'll just like send you to go to UCLA if you want. I'll just cover you. You can learn how to be a filmmaker like me.
So then he ends up taking him up on that offer.
Yeah, and I'm like, that's Brian Johnston. Like, that's the guy who directed like Jumanji and all this other stuff. I'm like, he was a guy at ILM, like just like learning how to do this stuff, and he just like stepped out of that role and like just started making movies.
Yeah,
like, that's crazy.
They said he did Jumanji. He did, I think it was Jurassic Park 3. He did Captain America, First Avenger.
Yeah.
So,
Which makes me like those movies so much more now, because I'm like, dude, this is one of the guys.
Yeah, he's one of the OGs. Like, he's one of the ground level ILM dudes who was burnt out and wanted to quit, and George Lucas kind of convinced him to stick around. What was the first movie that he did?
I don't remember.
They mentioned it, and he said, like, he has no doubt that George called Disney and was like, hey, this is a guy that he could do it for you. Yeah. So that's a pretty cool story. And he said, like, it's just George, his just ridiculous generosity. I mean, he set him on a path that he otherwise never would have pursued. He was ready to retire and just travel the world. So,
So I haven't finished the documentary series, but I'm sure it's going to cover one of the more infamous changes in the film industry, which was, of course, Jurassic Park, because that was the movie that definitely, of course, they'd been doing CG effects and creatures and characters before then, but that was the movie that really kind of changed the game.
Yeah.
That kind of set it up in a whole new space where it's like, wow, you can really make things come to life in a way never before done using CG. And that would change filmmaking, like, obviously.
Yeah.
For like the last 30 years.
When I left off, they highlighted the storyline with actually Ron Howard, which they kind of show his whole...
With Willow. And
where they have a scene where the sorcerer witch lady basically transforms into 3 or 4 different animals.
Yeah.
And like, they're like, how the heck are we going to do this? Are we going to use like a puppet what's his name? The guy we were talking about earlier, the guy who was really spearheading the computer graphics movement.
Yeah, Dennis Muran.
Dennis, yeah. He was like, oh, we could probably do that on a computer. And Ron was like, what?
Or like the creature from the abyss, James Cameron, like the water tendril. Cameron. It's funny to hear James Cameron talk about a time where he was like incredibly intimidated by talking about computer graphics with people.
And
because
skeptical.
He just wasn't familiar with it, and he didn't want to take a gamble on it necessarily.
Yeah.
Which is ironic considering he is like the guy pushing the envelope as far as he possibly can with CG.
Yeah, and his start was with The Abyss, with ILM, and the first, like, he said that before that there was one fully CGI character.
It was like young Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, and that was Dennis was behind that as well at ILM. And he's like, no, I think we can do this, James. So they did it with the water figure.
Yeah, and so that's actually kind of, just to like start kind of closing our thoughts on this, that's actually where it starts to get a little bit more controversial, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Because everybody's got an opinion about CG in films. It's like maybe overused, it's cheating, it's a shortcut, it's something that's like kind of takes away the magic. And I get that.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's something inherently kind of a weird and disconnecting about, hey, this wasn't made by human hands.
Right.
This was made by computer pixels.
Right.
And there's something about that I think you do lose. I mean, I love this documentary because you just, like, you love watching people, like, artists do their craft.
Yeah.
And it's not like I'm saying anybody who works on a computer on CG art, like, which is like what I do. It's not like I'm saying that they're not talented or that they don't work really hard. It's just like, I think Werner Herzog, I once heard him say it best, which is, you just hate not being able to trust your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing something and I know it's not real.
Right.
And that's not fair. Like, I want to see something and go, how did they do that?
Right.
I don't want to see something and think, oh, well, okay, just CG.
Yeah.
That's kind of a bummer. It's a little bit lame.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I've been wanting to talk about is like the concept of, has science gone too far?
I think it has.
Are we in the realm of this dark future where AI is taking over the very essence of artistry?
Yeah.
So I recently this week found this new thing on the internet called Midjourney.
Tell me about it.
Midjourney is an AI art generator.
Mm.
You go into you sign up through the website. It essentially, it's run through Discord, and you basically in Discord will type in a prompt, a series of prompts describing what you want the art to be, and an AI will spend about a minute generating images for you, and then from there you can keep enhancing them and getting more variances of the images until you arrive at something you like, and then just ask it to fully give a full resolution version of it. But it's insane, the quality of the stuff that's being produced. Again, it's AI.
Yeah.
Like, this is literally just computer algorithms making this stuff.
Yeah.
I'm sure all of it's based in essence off digital art that's available all over the internet, made by human hands
Right.
and made by people. But it's at the point where like you don't even need the artist anymore to do this stuff. It just can be generated through algorithms.
It's crazy.
Which is really strange.
Yeah, it is. I've seen some stuff where I've seen like TikToks and stuff where it's like, I'm using this AI generator and I typed in, astronaut in a field of roses.
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, I like this one and I like the background. So then I told it to give me more options of this. And then it just keeps going until, like you said, it narrows it down to like, this is the one, give me the full resolution. And it's this amazing, it looks like something that somebody spent 37 hours in Photoshop creating. Except they didn't.
And we're not even that far from this stuff being like fully immersive 3D as well.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about Google Earth.
Right.
I don't know if you've ever like done Google Earth in VR, or technically you can even do this on your computer. Like if you zoom in far enough on Google Earth, it will have 3D models of the stuff you're looking at.
Right.
It's no longer just like the flat 2D image. It's actually using AI to try to map, okay, this is a tree, this is a building. And that stuff only is getting better and better and better.
Yeah.
And I mean, I have a VR headset, and I was using Google Earth, and it's like, okay, I'm going to go to Paris, and I'm going to literally just have my person standing at the bottom of the Eiffel Tower, and it's like, well, wow, there it is. Right. It's like AI generated, like maybe some of the more memorable and important locations are fine-tuned.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, it's so crazy to think about digital technology. It's enhanced movie making so much, but you almost can't help but worry, like how much is being taken away.
Yeah.
Like how far is too far?
Well, I mean, I would say taking it back, my favorite part of this docuseries is the house imploding, where there are shotguns on set ready to blow that thing down the pipe. And it's like, that's gone. There will never be that again. That just like, that crude, like make it happen no matter what, driving the car down with the explosion right in front of the camera, like that's gone.
There is something in The Last Jedi. It's the scene where Rey and Kylo Ren are having their kind of force connection conversation with each other, and they touch fingertips.
Yeah.
And Luke Skywalker barges in and ruins their date, and he goes, Rey, no! And I don't know if he does it, I think if he does it, the hut she's in, like the stone hut, it explodes. Like every single one of the stone bricks like bursts outwards.
Yeah.
Come to find out, that was done practically.
Wow.
Like they actually had hundreds of wires hooked up to all these little foam boulders and stuff, and all at once they triggered it and just yoink.
Well, you know what? I think that's because that is their like cornerstone bedrock history.
Yeah.
That's who they are at heart. Even with all the technological advance, like this is what ILM does.
Yeah.
So they're the company that's going to kind of sprinkle that in. Like, here's a shot that we could really have some practical effects.
I think audiences, when they see a movie, they don't mind knowing that it's fake. Like, it's like, I know that's a guy in a goofy suit.
Right.
Or I know that's a puppet. They don't mind that because they feel like, hey, there's an artistry to it somehow.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's like when The Force Awakens has actually tons of practical stuff. I mean, you go into that Maz's castle, and it's like a room full of like, it's like the enhanced cantina scene if they could do it nowadays. It's like a room full of like 100 people in goofy costumes and crazy animatronics and puppets, and
it's the cantina that George wanted in A New Hope because he was like, I don't have enough aliens. I need more aliens.
They did reshoots of that too, by the way, because like the day of it just wasn't working, and so they had to like do a bunch of pickup shots later because that was when they had time to actually do it the way they wanted to.
Yeah,
it's kind of funny because there's an element where, like, for example, the most obvious way of looking at it is Lord of the Rings trilogy versus the Hobbit trilogy. I mean, we're looking at almost the exact same group of people,
right,
making almost the exact same types of films, but with completely different methods,
right,
and it dramatically changes the experience of how much you enjoy it.
For sure. Yeah, those two trilogies are like night and day.
Yeah.
night and day. But I'm sure that I basically got through almost all of episode 5 of this Light and Magic docuseries. There's episode 6, which I think is one of the longest ones. It's a little over an hour. I'm sure that they're going to touch on the prequels and all the work that they did with the prequels.
Yeah.
Like you said, Jurassic Park is going to be a part of it. And then I'm guessing the ending is just going to be like snippets of all the stuff that they worked on over the last 15 years or so.
It's going to be freeze frames of all these people being like, Dennis went on to run for president of the United States.
You know what else I thought was interesting? She wasn't in it much, at least
Kathleen
so
Kennedy?
far. Kathleen Kennedy.
Yeah, I mean, people pick on her a lot because they're unhappy with Star Wars' direction under Disney, but they also misunderstand, like, Kathleen Kennedy's been around for a long time.
Yeah. And from what I understand, she was handpicked by George. Like, she's the one that can do this.
Yeah, she was, I don't remember exactly what her position was, but I think she was like, she got into like being involved on filmmaking pretty early in the 70s, late 70s. And by the time like Raiders of the Lost Ark or maybe it was Temple of Doom, I mean, she was like serving as a producer.
Yeah.
With Steven Spielberg.
I think it was Temple of Doom.
Yeah. So she knew what she was doing.
Yeah, she's been around a long time. She's not just some random.
Yeah. It's too bad she became a hack.
Oh! Got her. Pew, pew, pew.
Boom,
Rap
boom,
sirens.
Boom. Poor Kathleen.
So what do you think about all this, Sean?
She's doing her best.
What is an industrial... On a scale of 1 to magic, how much light does industrial bring?
Man, it's definitely 5 tauntauns out of 10.
Nice. Yeah, I would agree with that.
It's 5 tauntauns out of 10 wampas, if you know what I mean.
Dang.
Yeah, one of the things that I was really, really grateful for watching the series is, like, when I was a kid, I loved watching the behind the scenes stuff
for sure
on movies. Like, yeah, you watch the movie, you got the DVD or the VHS, but like, dude, I would love to just sit there and watch all the behind the scenes stuff. Hours and hours and hours. And then, you get into the early 2000s, you get the extended edition of The Lord of the Rings, which has like 20 hours of behind the... I mean, like, to this day, nothing has ever been produced that so extensively delves into the making of a film franchise. And so it just like scratched that itch, especially because like I also would love watching a movie with the director's commentary or the cast commentary, because I want to unpack it. I want to learn.
Give me the full story.
Yeah, I want to, because like that stuff is sometimes more interesting to me than the movie.
Right.
Like I want to know how they made it happen.
Like at this point, learning all this behind the scenes of New Hope is way more interesting than A New Hope.
Yeah.
Because you see the ripple effects that had. It's like there was so much, not only for them to complete that movie, there was so much riding on them doing it the way that they did it. Yeah. And like it changed movies forever.
It's inspiring.
Super inspiring.
Like,
I love
hey,
it.
You can, if you can dream it, you can do it.
And that's why I Googled like, how do I become an ILM intern?
Yeah, like, well, I think James Cameron once, like, I think he said at some point, I mean, he was like a truck driver or something, and it must have been Star Wars, because he basically quit his job and he went to the library and he just like took out like a dozen books on filmmaking and just like spent all day reading them, and then just was like, I'm gonna make movies.
Freaking baller move.
Makes Terminator.
It's his origin story. What's yours, Sean?
It's an extremely goofy movie.
Wow, what do you know, Chuck? Looks like Goofy's a no-show. What happened to Goof, man?
That was the one.
Yep, that's right, Chuck.
That set you on the right path. Anything else you want to touch on, Sean?
I'm just here to say that it's been nice knowing you guys. But as an artist, apparently I'm a dying breed. Computers are taking over.
I guess so.
James Cameron, talking about Skynet, taking over humanity. It all comes full circle.
Yeah.
It's a prophetic roundabout.
He was afraid of ILM when he was making The Abyss.
And he should have trusted those fears.
He should have.
And now he's the guy filming people underwater for CG shots.
Freaking yikes.
Making 5 Avatar films.
Yamez.
That we're all hoping we get to see before we die, before the world ends.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Well,
dang.
the Ron Howard connection all the way back from American Graffiti to then him working with ILM on Willow to then his daughter directing episodes of The Mandalorian. I mean, that's a really cool connection.
Nepotism.
Dang.
Or, talent, I guess. I mean, hey, whatever. People work hard and they usually follow in their parents' footsteps. That's where they're most skilled.
Who you know.
Well, it is interesting to think that, like, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure George Lucas's kids are great people and are successful in their own ways, but it's like, it's weird that I never hear about them making movies or working in stuff.
Yeah, it's true.
Oh, well.
No.
Missed out.
I guess so. All right. Well, this has been, this was a really cool thing to dive into. I kind of threw it out as a topic of discussion. I saw it pop up on Disney Plus. I was like, oh, that might be interesting. I enjoyed this way more than I even thought I would. And
super cool stuff, man.
I love it. And like, I'm not the film nerd, but I'm becoming one because I hang out with you more and more.
Like, if I die and go to heaven, I hope I have infinite time just to watch behind the scenes of like all the movies I like.
Yeah.
That's all I want.
Take me back to when they were doing A New Hope. They had didn't he say like they were cutting it up even like the day before the premiere was set?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, take me back to that day and the stress and the chaos of the room, but knowing how it was all going to turn out, like seeing the like I said, the ripple in the water that it created.
I want to see the
cool
tree.
Stuff.
I want to see the tree of George Lucas.
You should AI it.
It's possible. It's not impossible, that's for sure.
Anything's possible. Anything's possible. Thanks for listening, guys. I would highly recommend watching the docuseries. The other one as well, Shadows of the Empire.
Empire of Dreams.
I also felt someone had to go. I felt someone had to die.
I don't know why.
Shadows of the Empire is another thing somebody should check out, though. That's a whole story there.
I don't know why that popped in my head. Yeah,
because it was the N64 game.
Oh, that's right.
At the Hoth level.
Empire of Dreams, I would recommend. When did that one come out, Sean? You said like 2005, 2006?
Yeah, it was around the time they put out the DVDs for... It's on Disney Plus.
Yeah, you should definitely watch that.
I felt someone had to die.
It doesn't matter which one you watch first or second. Just know that Empire of Dreams is kind of like an overall George Lucas Star Wars origin story, whereas Light and Magic is obviously just focusing on ILM and all that they've done. So, all right.
Turning Dennis Muran into a household name.
Sure did. Who? I knew his face, but even earlier I couldn't remember his name.
Now I'll never forget him.
He's the guy, though. All right. Thanks for listening. Leave a comment. Leave a like. If you're listening on Spotify or iTunes or Google Play or wherever you get your podcasts, please give us a review, comment, like, subscribe, all of those good things. We appreciate you guys listening, and we're having fun. So send this thing to the moon.